My name's Matt, and I will be talking with Sylvain Grande about the critical role product management plays in driving business growth and balancing processes with company culture.
So you're an experienced CPO. You work as an advisor. You work quite a time in the tech field. But your background, it's not only the background around the product, around the tech, but it's around the business. And I think I haven't discussed it before with any of my guests. It's like the P&L thing. So I wanted to start with that. So I just would like to understand, and maybe you could tell about this. Like, is the P&L important for you to understand from the product perspective? Why this is important, how this is influencing your work? So we can start with it.
Yeah, for sure. Look, the product and the chief product officer impact on P&L may be indirect, but I consider it essential, right? I think the traditional kind of view of product is like, oh, you focus on engagement of your team, of motivation as a manager, and then on product strategy, vision, and delivery quality. But this is just foundations that fuel customer impact, revenue growth, and also cost efficiency. So I think while most organizations tend to have a functional organization, and even in the case of matrix organization with general managers, they are not historically many people with product backgrounds that are in kind of business, seats. And let's remind ourselves that product management is still a line of work that is still young. But I think there is a lot more diversity now in product people profile. When I started, it was mostly ex-engineers. And there is a much deeper appreciation that product is intertwined with revenue, gross margin, direct contribution to upsell or cross-sell. And look, I had the chance to have direct P&L responsibility multiple times, so maybe it's a bit more familiar with me. But I would say that this is a bigger one of the, I think, biggest gap maybe for some product people now to really have a deep understanding of the business metrics and especially unit economics. Because I'll be honest, like I don't know how you can design a roadmap without understanding those points from the full life cycle, from acquisition to activation to engagement to retention, right? So I always tell my PMs, look, a feature shipped, but that is not known and not used is irrelevant. And I think actually the most frustrating thing. So I tell them, look, think always about the go-to-market plan. You may not think about it alone, but product people usually have a good understanding of the channels, and they can contribute a lot to how we roll out things and promote experiences that drive revenue. So for me, it's like a must-have now for sure.
And regarding the P&L and the financial KPIs for the CPOs or people around the product, so you don't have to be even a CPO to have the basic understanding of the P&L and how does it work, like how your work and features impact the results of the company. So maybe have you noticed like a common misunderstandings or the things that people are not so familiar from the like financial aspects, right? And maybe something that like a common mistakes that you notice around the PMs, around the product owners, CPOs.
I mean, look, I think there is at times there can be a self reinforcing wheel, including within organizations, because people that may not be outside of product, may not be familiar with what product does, essentially outline, hey, I want a roadmap where what about the delivery, right? And you're reinforcing that pure delivery wheel, whereby in the end, what matters is not output, it's outcomes, right? And so I do think that it's not about the inputs and the decision come from business, which is, I think, a very old view, right? It's like there is business inputs, and that can come from anywhere, including data analysis, where product usually can have a direct contribution. So understanding the business metrics, what drives revenue, what drives margin contribution, what are the key benchmarks? So that's even more important for the leadership, for the product leadership. But what drives the benchmarks that the board and the CEO will have in mind? I would encourage always products to participate in business reviews, and you need to share these elements. You need to raise your team awareness, obviously pending some confidentiality parts, and there is different culture. I tend to be like, maximum transparency camp. And I think you can relate it to some existing competencies of product people, where revenue is also about understanding segmentation, right? What it enables for customers. And so what you ship can be translated also in in sales pitches when you have a kind of sales-driven acquisition machine. And it's critical just to build those relationships in the organization, and it's bi-directional, right? Because the more you will make the effort to understand, let's say, so-called business mechanics, inputs, and economics, the more you can also explain how you prioritize the roadmap, and not just, hey, I'll turn out a roadmap and features, and I'll be measured by I shipped on time X, which is to be honest, not a great indicator of contribution.
My co-founder recently asked on the interview process, a good question: How will you contribute to the revenue of a company? How will you impact the revenue of a company? And what you are saying, I fully agree with that. I think understanding the P&L and basic financials, it's crucial. And I'm just wondering, in your case, maybe. So when I was starting the company, I had the problem that maybe sharing the financial data, it's it's bad thing. Even sharing with the employees. So you have a weekly get a weekly newsletter or weekly updates, right? And sharing the financial data, it's really hard for the co-founder or for the leaders to do with the people. But nowadays, my mindset switch a lot. So I think when the people are getting the context on the product side, on the business side, on the engineering side, it's even better because they understand how the mechanics, how the revenue growth and the profit growth works. So in your case, you work in a various organizations. So do you share the financial data with the employees, or you are really not pushy with that and afraid of doing it?
No, I think there are almost two elements. There are differences in company cultures, right? And also in phases. There are always some phases where it's a bit harder to share with the same level of transparency. If I think about a company that may not be doing super well, that may be running out of cash, it may actually be counterproductive to give too often the details about the runway, as an example. I think the challenge is how do you explain with whom you share, right? Because you need to recognize that it's not just about sharing a document with an entire organization and assuming everybody will understand the same thing and will translate into actionability in the same way, right? First, you need to work on the differences in understanding, and then you need to really do the extra mile, whereby people react differently. Some may be motivated, some may panic, and as importantly, you need to translate and connect it. Whatever your framework, if it's OKR, you need to be able to ask anyone in the organization, do you understand how your objectives and your contribution relate directly or indirectly, that's okay at times, to a top level indicator, right? Because let's say a PM that works on upsell and cross-sell, there's a much easier connection than someone that manages the platform team or the infrastructure, right? And on the infrastructure side, it may be easier to connect to the cost efficiency. So I think it's really always about that translation. And that translation, by the way, may happen differently, not just within product, but between product design and engineering, right? You don't have the same motivation drivers, but you need to have a common, I think, frame and understanding of look, if we do this, do we have an acquisition problem? Do we have a growth objective? Do we have an EBITDA kind of topic or focus? And you always have the same set of KPIs. You should not change KPIs all the time. That's very confusing for people. But you need to indicate what is the ranking order, right? There's always one or two KPIs that matter most at different phases of growth or time of a company. Many people now focus on things like, EBITDA and revenue per employee. Those metrics existed 10 years ago. It's just the ranking order has changed.
And how about the MBA studies? Did they like change your mindset in some way? Like you had this aha moment and now like, you started to operate a bit differently than before?
I mean, look, I think it's a bit different because I entered product when it was a nascent field, and my field of study was business and MBA. So I'm a bit, I have that, I would say, bias. I think as always, it's about curiosity. And look, it's better if you know how to read a P&L. It's better if you have basic understanding of core economics. But in the end, it's like mostly logical things that you can, I think, learn over time. And you should not be afraid about the standard acronyms that every field has. So it's about what are the key drivers of the unit economics? I think this is really in the end, it boils down to what does it take to get one more customer? What does it take to get one more units of growth, contribution margin, or cash? It's you have different level of understanding, but yeah, MBA for sure help, but there are many other ways. There are lots of resources online now. So there are, let's say, cheaper ways to acquire that knowledge that MBAs nowadays.
And let's talk about the processes. It's the thing that I'm really bad at. So, but I'm wondering if you enter a new organization, do you have your own processes or the areas where you put the most of the emphasis, which processes are most important for you?
Yeah, look, I think this is also depending on people's literally philosophy. I believe every company is a bit different. Every context matters. But there is also a lot of commonalities between topics, between organizations. So how do you find that balance whereby you don't want process to kill culture? You want a good equilibrium between both. And so the way I translate it personally, and it's also a personal philosophy, I'm not obsessed about process standardization for everything. I rather focus on few processes where I essentially care and mandate standardization, and one of which is really what I call the initiative briefing or the epic document. If you're not able, I think, in product to write whatever, a 2-pager where you outline what you want to do for whom, with what success metrics, and what you would not do, then I think there is a problem, right? So personally, in my teams, that's one of the few processes where irrespective of where I work, I feel this is important to standardize. Otherwise, I think there is a fine-grained relation with how you, what are the things you need to do to raise the bar constantly, right? Because I think what's most important is we're all learning, or we should all be learning all the time. And I think one of the elements in product that is amazing is especially in software, is we can learn new things very fast. And I think a key objective of culture and process is to make sure that you have a fast learning organization where people learn from the successes and failures of everyone as fast as possible, right? Which is why having hypothesis in the first place when you work on something is critical, just for your own sake. In terms of, without going into details of agile, part of that means that however you do it, retrospectives are really important, sharing learnings. especially cross-functionally, which is not a tendency that many organizations have, is critical. For the rest, I think it's a lot more about culture. And I really emphasize culture. Like, culture is usually more powerful than processes, but also harder to change, right? So it could be like, oh, what are your principles, right? Data-driven, customer centricity, speed, learning, and how do you make sure that the few processes you have really kind of display those objectives from a culture standpoint. And when it's like sinks in, you essentially need a lot less processes, in my view.
I kind of understand the culture. Like, if you have the right culture, you can improvise in the right direction without the processes. This is like how I kind of
Yeah.
right. So I fully agree.
Many organizations obviously have the objective to succeed and scale, with differences between succeeding and scaling. So I think this is really important that you have thresholds of organizations that tend to complexify or naturally kind of create silos or block things. So how do you have compensating mechanisms, ideally from the culture itself, but also from processes when you meet those different thresholds, right? It's like, why do people redesign orgs constantly? Sometimes there are a lot of bad reasons, but there is one good hypothesis, which is humans do not really like change in most cases, and things tend to solidify or get siloed, and change brings some, I think, some elements, some positive elements. But how do you do that in the best way? And it's really through culture that I think you create those foundations.
Sylvain, and you mentioned the revenue per employee as a KPI. So this is interesting point. So why do you think this is important for organization? And maybe like, how do you measure it? Do you measure it like, I don't know, on the product or engineering people, or all, like the whole organization?
Yeah, I mean, look, revenue per employee is this funny, simple, new KPI that is not new at all, right? We just had lost that view, and to be honest, in many org, this was never a shared KPI. Look, you can obviously play with it a bit through outsourcing, etc. But I think it fundamentally helps beyond the benchmarks, which is a small tendency that we just do that metric for benchmarks, right? Yeah, benchmarks are good, but they also have differences. But it helps people connect, right? I think it's very easy when you have a company that does like tens of millions or hundreds of millions of revenue and whatever kind of EBITDA profile or profit margin profile. Like, this is very in your face. Like, oh, this is the revenue we bring per employee. Oh, my salary is, right? And it's, I can connect it. It's a very in your face metric. I think the next one would be margin per employee, right? Because I think this one is less talked about. And I think when you work in product and tech, you need to understand it in relation to the costs, right, of product and tech that tend to be in most organizations cost centers. And as a good example, like if you work in infrastructure, you can understand the cost per unit economics, right? This is the cost of running my infrastructure per 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 customers. And you need to understand that margin usually comes from scale, right? So I think something key for people beyond the revenue per employee, and that's always like more difficult to explain, but in product and tech, like in anything, you have fixed and variable costs. And I know it sounds like super basic, but a lot of people may not be clear about what is a truly fixed cost, what is a truly variable cost, and what is a essentially in between. Like, look, in some countries, labor costs tend to be a lot more fixed than variable. So I think this is really important.
I have a feeling that this KPI is relevant today, last year, but like in a few years, we'll forget about it, and this will be another switch. because the money will be cheaper and the people start to in a higher speed.
It also
it's like it goes.
Yeah, it goes. Yeah, look, business is a bit like fashion. There are cycles, right? If you recall over the past 40 years, what the theory has said on the theory of the firm and verticalization, horizontalization, vertical, etc. Like, I mean, we've changed many, many times. But I do think that revenue per employee actually will also evolve in relation to artificial intelligence. New innovations or fundamental breakthrough tend to have long to be seen economic effects, but also some disproportionate effect on top percentile, top quartile. And so I think you will see also I think huge productivity gains in some elements that will impact revenue per employee, and we'll have to think a bit differently about that through AI. So right now it's a bit like the famous Solo's paradox from 25 years ago. I see computers everywhere but in statistics. I see AI everywhere but in statistics. I think it will exactly have the same play. It will be coming into the statistics very soon.
I wanted to discuss the motivation of engineers and product people versus the business KPIs. I'm just wondering, because I feel like the engineers and product people, they are not so motivated or so, they don't stick so much to the business KPIs as the sales does, right? And they are not always motivated around it. So maybe you could give me some examples. How do you encourage those guys? How do you motivate them to deliver those business KPIs, like to have it always on the back of their minds?
Look, as much as I am quite deep in business, I believe it's important for product and tech to understand and to grasp the business metrics. I do not believe that business metrics are the key motivators for product and tech people. You need to start there. So these are, in my view, proxy outcomes of good work. And what motivates usually product and tech people is having impacts on customers and prospects thanks to a great product, a great experience. It's about shipping, it's about delighting, it's about solving complex problems. And so I think there is plenty of examples where you can connect the dots, right? Let's say revenue needs to improve by 10%. That may not be very translatable or motivating for some product and tech people. But what if we say, hey, look, we improve this and this, and then we're actually going to work on the usage and satisfaction of these features and experiences, and will actually result in X% increased retention rates, right? Which actually means 10% revenue increase. So that's just a very basic example. Or if you look at on the cost side, it could be very motivating for engineers to say, look, we've improved the scalability of our system, the resiliency of our systems, which actually resulted in that cost efficiency or the ability to support 20% more customers on the same infra, right? So I think it depends. I gave two very different examples actually, and I think whether you're in product, in design, in data, or in engineering teams, you need to find, and even within engineering, right? It's like an engineer that works on, let's say, a super customer-facing feature of the website or the acquisition funnel, understands way better some of the impacts and mechanics usually than a platform engineer, right? The lower you are in the stack, the more difficult it is to translate some inputs, but then you need to find other mechanics to explain that connection.
I have a question from my colleague, to be honest, right now. So I have a colleague who's a CPO in an organization. They're growing pretty fast. And we were discussing a few weeks ago the case that he's having on his plate. And the case is following that they, growing pretty fast. They have the ERP system that connects to sales, back office, accounting, like one central kind of thing for everybody. But, this system, over time, they adding some new features, they are rebuilding it, and everybody's hates it. So I think you saw that kind of system before. And he he has a challenge right now. Should they buy something out of the shelf and adjust to their needs, or maybe to build a solution, like a custom solution? And he was asking me how do you approach this kind of thing? Like, maybe do you have some process behind it, or maybe some what is your thinking process behind it? How would you approach it?
I mean, look, it's a build versus buy is like all things product. You first need to define the scope of the issue, the dependencies, and what can be split and prioritized. And I think, look, the key elements are, first, everyone has precious resources. So the key is this really core or so specific? And I mean, when I mean specific is like for real, right? Because product and tech teams have the tendency to say yeah, our situation is so specific, we need to build it, which is rarely the case. To decide whether it's an internal team that needs to spend time on this, there is often complexity also in how multiple systems connect and interact. We've all seen that, and between external and internal systems. So it means that you need to be clear whether the issue is the system, or actually how the system integrates within the larger architecture or systems of the company. So look, I've had multiple experiences with different contexts on this. In one of the previous companies I worked for, Yield Street in the US, that was a fintech. Very early on, we had kind of a system that enabled us to track deals, etc. So we implemented it, but we did a lot of development internally around portfolio valuations, which is quite complicated. And the assumption at the time was this is core, and this connects to the customer's portfolio view, etc. And in the end, 4 years in, we embarked on a journey to integrate with a specific system that was doing this, but we kept the integration with all the other things we did internally. We did not deploy all the modules at the same time. And we essentially worked a lot on the architecture and the value. And we said, look, long-term, if you want to scale, this is not something that is core to us, that we know how to do well. And by the way, in terms of reputation, it actually helps also to have a very well-known, robust, we can debate system that was done externally and integrated internally correctly. So it really, really depends. There is no right or wrong answer. There is usually a lot of these decisions are have lots of elements of legacy. And in many cases, decisions are made without even understanding the full context and the full history of why things were made in the first place, right? So the key point is, if you can, always document things for the next people to have a better understanding, and document what led you to that decision at the moment, because the hypotheses likely have changed. When an organization scales, you have very different problematics, and it's very rare that you will find one off-the-shelf product that does everything you need, right? So do you need to replicate what NetSuite does in accounting? Yeah, likely not, right? But how do you make the information flow between your core products and NetSuite or whatever equivalent? Just depends on the organization. It also has, you need to think about architecture, but also about data engineering flows, right? Because I think in most cases, topics like data governance, from taxonomy to where is the source of truth, what are the data flows, is a misunderstood topic. And when you build things and you integrate with external solutions, you usually raise those topics again. So I would encourage people to do that always. But I don't have a magic solution for that, to be honest.
Yeah, I understand. But long story short, you would go and ask around the stakeholders and the users of the software, what are their problems with the current software, right? You will first start to map it, and based on that, you will.
Yeah, but I think always what are the needs, what are the issues for sure, but is this really core to what we need to build? And it can be core, yet it doesn't mean that you have to build everything, right? So what is exactly core? What is differentiating? What are the off-the-shelf solutions? What are the additional things you need to work on? And usually a lot of the complexity and the relies in the integration of the-shelf solution within an existing system or within a wider understanding. So you usually need to touch, when you integrate third-party solutions, you need to touch many small systems to make it work well. It's like the phrase off the shelf is obviously kind of a bit misleading in that sense.
What are the biggest challenges or the pain points that you as a CPO is facing?
I mean, I think it again depends on the context of the organization. I think at the basic level is with the past 10 years or so, that was as of kind of a year and a half ago, being exceptional times with cheap money growth. A lot of companies, including ours, adopted maybe practices that obviously were made for absolute growth and not always scalable growth or at good unit economics. So it relates to like change management always, like how do you drive the ability, and going back to culture and processes, it's mostly around culture, where people can react and adapt to different times. That's always as a kind of a manager and leader that always is on my mind. And then I think it's for us, it's like how do we drive on a very complex topic like payroll, more satisfied autonomy for our customers. So that's one of our key challenges. And then how do you drive a multi-product strategy that you can connect your kind of product architecture that has solid foundations that enables actually to launch new lines of business or to package things differently. So these are, I would say, the two key challenges I would highlight currently.
And for you, like, what challenges do you have on your plate this year?
I mean, in the end, it's all about delivering value, right? Customer satisfaction, autonomy, and many other elements, and then contributing to the business growth and to the path to profitability. We're not yet a profitable company, but we're on the way to get there. And so it's as simple as, look, you have a lot of trade-offs to do. That's also one of the pain, but also one of the exciting part of the job. And how do you balance things, right? Like the biggest challenge, I think always at whatever level you are in product is to make decisions and trade-off, usually as fast as possible, as transparently as possible, so people understand why you made the decision at the time. And look, in the end, it's about having a great product, however it is measured.
What would you advise? Like, what advice would you give to other leaders on the product side, or like who around like the highly distributed teams? I think like nowadays we work in a hybrid environment. We work in an environment where you have like in-house people, you have some people outsourced, and maybe do you have like your own key factors or approaches how to make this delivery successful in this kind of environment?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go very basic. It's over communication, clear ownership, and aligning everyone to the same product vision. I think these are critical, especially I think with more distributed teams. So look, if you have different configurations, right? I worked in many different configurations, but mostly distributed teams, but mostly in-house. Obviously, I leverage a few external teams at times. When you have external teams, it's about even more creating a seamless workflow where in-house and external work together. But they can be very different setups. Like I worked with different models where you had many locations, where teams and responsibilities were defined by location. But I also worked in setups where they were split across location and all have their pros and cons. I think the key thing is, whatever your org model, you will always have some issues. That's normal. So what is the next step? How do you think of what I call your compensating mechanism, right? You always need to correct for something, right? There's always a silo that will be created somewhere. So I think it's very important. But communication, ownership, clarity, and context. This is like the basic stuff that is simple to say, very hard to live by.
I would like to ask my guests about like the hardest or the toughest thing that they have done in their career. Maybe it could be like a controversial decision that it turned out right, and like the lessons learned out of it. So I'm wondering, in your case, Sylvain, what was the hardest thing that you feel that you have done it, and like what was the learning out of it?
I'll be honest, I'm not sure I would give the same answer to that question each time I am asked, because I really believe there are moments of hard things, right? You can tell always the story, oh, this was the hardest thing, and maybe for some people it's clear. For me, I think it's a lot of moments. Look, when I was at SoundCloud, launching subscription was really, really tough, aligning an entire industry on kind of DJ mixes, copyright status with product development, labels negotiation at the same time, influencing the roadmap deeply. And I was also very involved in those negotiations. In other cases was like fundraising, where it can be very, very grinding because it's on top of your day-to-day job. Letting go someone in your team that was a good performer for the first time because of obviously economic reasons. Having to part ways with colleagues over Zoom during COVID. I think a lot of people say that this was a very hard thing to do, and that's obvious. So it's a lot of moments. It's very hard for me to point to one project that was like harder than the other, because like hard is also what you like, right? I think what I like, hard problems to solve and to fix. But there are plenty of hard moments. The key is to make sure that in those hard moments, like there are teams around you, that you create that those contacts, right? Because a lot of people love to solve hard problems together and have the satisfaction of going through that phase.
And how about the fundraising? This is interesting what you mentioned. So because this is additional work for you, it means like you need to deliver more data for the investors. They are constantly asking like, hey, what are the cohorts and analytics around the users, if the application is sticky or not, or maybe I'm wrong. Could you elaborate on that?
No, I think, look, I was very, very involved in the in Yale Street Series C fundraising. We raised 150 million, and it was a long process, right? And we raised in kind of like two parts. I was essentially representing product and tech, but as importantly also marketing and data. I was responsible for the data team, and you have a lot of like, the time is not fully controlled by you. That's the first part. You have your pitch deck, your presentations, etc., but you constantly refine them. That's normal. And then you see the differences in angles in the questioning from different VCs or investors. And by the way, like one of the most satisfying meeting were the ones where we got the hardest questions. Where I got the hardest questions, it was like a lot of talking a lot about like CAC, LTV dynamics, or customer acquisition costs, lifetime value in relation to scaling the business. So a lot of satisfaction, but also like hard moments, right? Because it's on a period of time that for us was 6 months plus. Lots of learnings, being exposed to people that you may not be interacting with. I mean, I participated in a few fundraising, but this one I was like essentially with the founders, directly directly in the core team doing all meetings. So it was a great learning.
And my last question that I ask all of my guests, can you recommend any books, podcasts, resources, maybe conferences that have been particularly helpful to you as a leader in tech?
Yeah. Look, I think it's always what is like in your memory at a specific point in time. I think recently, and I would recommend it, it's called The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman. He's obviously now the AI leader at Microsoft around transformational breakthrough from AI and also biology and robotics, etc. I read a few newsletters, and I think Growth Unhinged by Kyle Polyer is obviously a well-known one, but also a very detailed, very helpful one. I think one of the books that, look, there are many business books out there. I think a lot of them roughly say the same things, but I think Hard Things About Hard Things or Radical Candor by Kim Scott, I think are some that I think stayed with me. And I think on purely like maybe a bit more purely product, there are so many things. I mean, I know likely 1,000th of a millionth of what exists, but I think Masters of Scale by Reid Hoffman, Lenny's podcast, obviously from Lenny Rashitsky, and I think in the French community, Clé de Voûte is also one I would recommend. But I get a lot of inspiration outside of business books and podcasts, and I think I would encourage everyone. You know, I had a funny bias in my first job. I was working for the CEO and the executive team at Orange France Telecom, and one of my job responsibility was to summarize all the business books that were published in 2-pagers, and I still have those 2-pagers from a long time ago. So I got a bit of a bias of reading too many, and I think you can get a lot of inspiration outside of business books, whether it's in fiction, in whatever passion. We just finished the Olympics and the Paralympics in Paris. You can get a lot of inspiration from things like this.
I think this is a great lesson for everybody, and I feel when I'm talking with the experienced people, just I mean like working many years, they saying the same thing. Like they are recommending the stuff that are outside of our bubble, right? To get some different kind of inspiration. So I fully agree with that. I do the same. So I stopped to read those like business books. I prefer summaries because you know you on the 2-pager you can get like the thing like the full understanding on the book on the 2 pages, right? So kind of I
on fiction you cannot summarize in 2 pages.
Exactly.
So that's a big advantage.
Exactly. Sylvain, thank you so much for a really interesting talk. I really appreciate it. I wish you a lot of success in the current and the next ventures. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Follow Matt on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Better Tech Leadership newsletter.